Across the neighborhoods of America, those quiet edges where the woods press against the back porch and the night settles heavy over the yard, there are things people don't talk about openly. Creatures that linger just past the tree line, watching houses from the dark. The rake crouching beside sheds and fence lines, the dogman pacing the perimeter of rural homes, and pale crawlers creeping beneath decks and windows. People call them stories. But families swear they've heard footsteps in the grass, tapping at the walls, and heavy breathing outside their bedroom windows long after midnight. Some say they're myths, but what if they aren't? Tonight, we explore 4 real backyard creature encounters. Stories of suburban edges, rural homes, and quiet neighborhoods where something stepped out of the woods and came too close to the house. In the end, you'll have to decide if you believe. Welcome to Whispers After Dark, where shadows speak and the night listens. Before we begin, take a moment to like, subscribe, tap the notification bell, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. And if you've ever heard something move through your yard after dark, tell us your story. Now settle in, let the storm drift across the rooftops, and ease into sleep as we begin 4 terrifying backyard creature encounters from right outside the porch light. Our first story tonight is the Rake, the watcher at the door. People who've seen it describe a pale, starved thing with limbs far too long, a body that stretches and unfolds in slow, unnatural motions, as if it's trying to remember how to mimic the shape of a human. It doesn't move the way living things move. It glides low to the ground, rising only when it believes it hasn't been noticed. It never flinches when light touches it. It only crouches deeper, tilting its head in a slow, deliberate angle, as if studying whoever dared to look back. It doesn't always approach. Sometimes it doesn't move at all. It simply waits in the places we forget to watch. The dark corner of the yard, the edge of the porch, the shadow outside a window. This is my story about the Rake and how it terrorized my family. I came back to my childhood home for the first time in years after both my parents passed away. The house stood exactly as I remembered it. Same faded siding, same leaning fence, same patchy grass in the backyard that never seemed to grow right. The silence inside felt heavier than I expected, as if the walls held memories I had never given them permission to keep. I told myself the unease came from the emptiness, from grief, and the way a home changes once the people who shaped it are gone. But the truth settled in the moment dusk slipped across the yard. The shadows fell in the same shapes they had 25 years ago, pooling against the fence line in thick, patient patches. I recognized the feeling instantly. I wasn't alone out here. I hadn't been alone then, and I realized now I wasn't alone tonight. I still remember the first time I saw it. I was 14, still flushed from the excitement of my birthday party. My parents had finally agreed to let me invite friends to spend the night. 4 boys my age who laughed too loud, ate too much, and treated the backyard like our own private world. The smell of charcoal drifted from the grill as we roasted hot dogs over a fire pit my dad had set up earlier that afternoon. Music played low from a battered speaker balanced on a plastic table. The air was cool but comfortable, filled with the late summer scent of cut grass and the faint sweetness of my mother's gardenias blooming near the porch steps. Ours was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew everyone and nobody locked their doors until midnight. Safe, ordinary, the kind of place where nothing truly bad ever happened. But even that night, something felt off to me, small details as I didn't have the language to understand them. The way the crickets went quiet all at once. The way the breeze died without warning. The way the shadows near the fence seemed to deepen instead of fading into the firelight. One of my friends joked that something was watching us from the trees, but we were kids, high on sugar and attention, so the comment dissolved into laughter. Only I kept glancing at that corner of the yard where the trees leaned in just enough to swallow the moonlight. Much later, when the last of the jokes faded and the fire died down into embers, I looked again and saw movement. Not a person, not an animal. Something pale unfolding itself from the darkness behind the woodpile. It stretched upward slowly, like its limbs were too long to coordinate, like it was remembering how to rise. Its skin caught the leftover glow of the coals, the color between bone and ash. The sight barely registered before a gust of wind hit, scattering leaves and sending sparks climbing into the air. When I looked again, it was gone, leaving only the impression of shape and height burned into my mind. I didn't mention it to anyone. It felt too strange, too unreal. And the safety of childhood makes you believe that if you ignore something long enough, it can't touch you. But sometime after midnight, long after the laughter faded and my friends had collapsed into sleeping bags across the den floor, something pulled me awake. Not a sound at first, just a feeling, a slow tightening in my chest like I'd been dreaming with my eyes open. The room was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow of the VCR clock and the dying orange flicker from the fire pit outside. I pushed myself up quietly, careful not to wake anyone, and wandered toward the patio door. The glass was cold when I touched it, colder than it should have been in September. Outside, the fire had burned down to embers, soft red coals breathing light into the yard. Something moved beside them. At first I thought it was one of the neighborhood dogs. Then it straightened, not by standing, but by unfolding. Long limbs rose out of the shadows in slow, deliberate pieces, each joint lifting with a faint shiver as if remembering how to move. Its skin caught the ember glow, pale, stretched thin over sharp bone, almost translucent in places. Even hunched, it looked too tall to belong in the backyard. It crept on all fours, but not like an animal, more like something testing the ground. Its elbows jutted high, legs bending wrong, body shifting in a slow ripple toward the patio. And then it stopped, completely. No sway, no breath, no twitch. Just frozen in a crouch like it had turned itself into a statue. Its head turned last. The movement was slow and smooth, like the skull rotated on oiled hinges. The eyes, dark, reflective, empty, caught the faintest bit of firelight and held it without blinking. It tilted its head farther, farther still, as if trying to understand the shape of me standing behind the glass. My stomach dropped so hard I thought my knees would go out from under me. Then it crawled closer. Hands, if you could call them that, pressed into the dirt, long fingers curling into the earth, pulling it forward one silent inch at a time. It wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. It crawled with the confidence of something that already knew exactly where I was. When it reached the edge of the patio concrete, it rose again, not fully upright, but enough that its face, too smooth, too long, lifted toward the door. I hadn't realized my hand was trembling until my fingernails tapped the glass. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. Not fast, not jerking, just an unnatural precision that made the hair on my arms lift. It leaned in, stretching its neck forward, the skin tightening like wax over bone. I saw the faint rise and fall of its chest, shallow and slow, as if breathing took effort. And then it lowered itself, inch by inch, until it was staring directly through the patio door. At me. I don't know how I kept from screaming. Instinct took over. I grabbed the edge of the blinds and yanked them down so hard they slapped against the frame. The second the fabric fell between us, I stumbled backward and crawled into my sleeping bag, heart hammering so hard the sound drowned out everything else. I lay awake until dawn. Every creak of the house, every shift of cooling wood outside, every faint swish of leaves scraped at my nerves. I was sure, absolutely sure, it was still out there, listening, waiting. By morning, the yard looked untouched. The fire pit held the same dying coals. My parents made pancakes and laughed about how late we all slept. None of my friends had heard a thing, but I had, and the rake had seen me. Long after everyone went home, after the laughter faded, I felt uneasy. I wanted to tell my parents, but my dad was a no-nonsense sort of person. Finally, I convinced myself that it was my imagination, probably from the horror movie we watched that night. It was about a week later. The house settled into sleep. I woke to a faint scraping sound outside my bedroom window. Our house sat low to the ground, the window only a few feet above the lawn. I lay still, listening. Soft friction against glass, something dragging a fingertip or a claw slowly downward. I felt the vibration through the mattress frame, through the floorboards, through the air itself. I turned my head toward the window, and for a brief heartbeat I saw it crouched in the grass, staring at me through the screen, pale, elongated, its body folded at impossible angles, its head tilted in a slow, curious twitch, as though studying how I breathed. Its eyes were the worst part, not glowing, not animalistic, just black, bottomless, and reflective enough to show a faint shimmer of moonlight across the surface. It didn't blink. It didn't flinch when I moved. It simply watched. It became a pattern after that. Night after night, I sensed it before I saw it. A change in the temperature of my room, a sudden absence of insect noise, the faint pressure of being observed. Then I'd glance at the window or the yard and see it, standing still near the fence, or crouched beside the shed, or perched just beyond the reach of the porch light, always waiting, always angled toward the house like it was calculating. My parents noticed the change in me, but never believed the truth. They thought the scratches that appeared on the siding were from stray cats. They thought the trampled grass under my window came from raccoons. They thought the sleepless nights were hormones and nerves. It wasn't until the night the creature came to the patio door that my father finally took it seriously. That night I woke to a faint, rhythmic thump, soft and even, like something gently testing the glass. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw the silhouette, long limbs pressed against the sliding door, a head tilted sideways in unnatural angles. The creature's spine arched in slow twitching motions as though adjusting its height to peer into the house. Its breath fogged the glass in damp crescents. The porch light flickered above it, revealing the sharp outline of its ribs expanding and contracting in shallow, animalistic patterns. That was when I noticed my mother standing just behind me, frozen in the dim glow of the hallway nightlight. The bottle she'd prepared for my baby sister slipped from her hand and shattered, the sharp crack echoing through the house like a gunshot. The creature jerked at the sound, its entire frame recoiling in a sudden spider-like contraction just as my father burst into the hallway. For a heartbeat, he stood beside us, staring directly at the flames. A moment later, the creature recoiled, folding backward on itself with unnatural speed before melting into the darkness beyond the porch. The yard swallowed it completely in a matter of seconds, as though it had never been there at all. We didn't go back to sleep after that. We sat together around the kitchen table, the house too quiet and too bright, while I told them everything. How I'd seen it the night of my birthday party, how it had crouched by the fire pit, how I'd been too afraid to say anything because I thought no one would believe me. My father listened without interrupting, his jaw set in a tight, quiet line, and the next afternoon he came home with a large shepherd that took to patrolling the yard as if it already understood what it was meant to keep away. After that, the creature never appeared again, or if it did, the dog kept it too far from the windows for any of us to see. Years passed. I grew up. The memories settled into the back of my mind, half dream, half nightmare, and part of me convinced myself it had been the imagination of a boy desperate for something more exciting than suburban normalcy. Until tonight. Standing in the same house again, decades later, the dog long dead, the yard quiet as it was the night after my 14th birthday, I felt the same shift in the air, the same emptiness, the same pressure crawling across my skin. When I stepped toward the sliding door, I saw it, standing at the edge of the yard where the shadows collected, tall and unnatural, its limbs unfolding like it had been asleep for years and had finally woken up. It tilted its head the same way it had that night, slow, curious, patient. It had never left this place. It had simply been waiting for me to come home. We continue our stories of backyard creature encounters with Dogman. It followed us home. People who talk about the Dogman usually whisper like they're afraid the thing might clear its own name. Descriptions vary, sometimes wolf, sometimes man, sometimes both, but one detail remains the same. It stands upright when it chooses, with the hulking outline of a soldier and the predatory stillness of something built to hunt. Some say it stalks the forgotten corners of the Appalachian foothills. Others claim it came from the old VDL restricted lands where the state fenced off miles of forest for research that no one ever explained. Conspiracy theorists insist the Dogman was a military experiment gone wrong. I never believed any of that, not then. Not until the night it followed my family home. This is my story about the Dogman and the night it stalked us from the woods to our own backyard. I was 16 the first time I saw the VDL boundary signs up close, riding shotgun in my father's truck as we bounced down an old service road that cut through the pines. Dad had been stationed there years earlier, and he worked in military engineering long before the land was transferred to the state. He didn't talk about what he did out there, and I didn't ask. That summer, a buddy of his retired and invited us to help repair an old cabin he bought near the restricted line. Dad said it would be good for me to learn some real work, patching siding, fixing decking, hauling lumber. We spent long days repairing what we could and long nights listening to the woods settle around us, the trees shifting and popping in the heat of August. The cabin felt isolated, but not unsafe, and we slept soundly the first night. On the second night, things changed. The woods went silent halfway through dinner, the kind of sudden, absolute quiet that makes the hair inside your ears vibrate. I remember pausing with a fork in my hand as the air thickened with the scent of pine sap and something musky, almost metallic. Dad gave me a look, not fear exactly, but alertness, and stepped onto the porch with a flashlight. I followed, though part of me wished I'd stayed inside. The beam cut across the tree line just as something massive moved between the trunks. Not running, just shifting its weight like it was deciding whether or not to reveal itself. All we saw at first were the eyes, red, faint, glowing as if reflecting a fire that wasn't there. They hovered at the height of a man's face before dipping to all fours again, disappearing into the underbrush with a soft ripple of leaves. Dad didn't say a word. He just went back inside, locked the door, and pretended nothing had happened, but I noticed how he and his friend talked quietly. I saw the hunting rifle placed carefully beside the door. I lay awake for hours listening to the cabin breathe and settle. At some point, long after the fire had gone out, I heard slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin, heavy enough to feel through the mattress, soft enough to sound intentional. Something brushed the siding with a rough scrape, then paused beneath the bedroom window. I held my breath and stared at the ceiling, and when the breathing finally faded, I didn't sleep again until dawn. We left the next morning, but the thing didn't stay behind. Dad drove us home in silence, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, certain the shadows along the road shifted just a little too smoothly. That night, I tried to convince myself it had been imagination, nerves, exhaustion, until the scratching started. Soft at first, like a tree branch dragged across the siding, then firmer, more controlled. When I looked out my bedroom window, I saw a shape crouched low beside the fence. Massive shoulders hunched beneath coarse fur, legs bent too long for a man, too angled for an animal. It lifted its head, and those same red eyes found the window as if they had been searching for me specifically. It stood slowly, rising until its silhouette filled the space between two fence posts, upright, towering, watching. The yard erupted a second later when our old chain-link gate rattled violently, shaking like something enormous leaned its weight against it. Dad tore down the hallway half-dressed, yelling for me to stay back, but I was already staring through the blinds as the creature stepped into the wash of the security light. Its fur bristled along a spine far too long, tapering into powerful limbs that ended in hands instead of paws, hands tipped with claws that clicked softly against the concrete. It moved like a soldier advancing, steady and controlled, shoulders rolling beneath its mask with a strange, deliberate grace. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. I couldn't understand how something like that could exist anywhere near civilization. Dad slammed the back door and shouted into the darkness, but the Dogman simply turned its head, studying us the way a predator studies prey. It isn't ready to chase yet. It lowered itself again, shifting onto knuckles thick as branches, and glided toward the shadows at the side of the house. A moment later, it vanished into the tree line. Dad made 2 phone calls that night. The first was short, just a few quiet words in a long silence. The second lasted nearly an hour. He stood in the kitchen with the lights off, staring into the yard as he spoke in that clipped, military tone I rarely heard anymore. 3 nights later, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up in front of our house after sunset. Men climbed out wearing plain clothes and expressions carved out of stone. Dad met them in the driveway. They didn't ask to come inside. They didn't look at me. I recognized 2 of them, men who had worked with him on the old base years earlier. After they left, Dad told me it had been wildlife officers checking the fence line. He never mentioned the Dogman again. My mother wouldn't talk about it either. Every question I asked was met with the same tight-lipped silence. For years afterward, my father insisted nothing had happened. But I remembered what I saw. I remembered what followed us from the woods that night. And sometimes, when the world is quiet and the shadow shifts just a little too smoothly at the edge of my vision, I wonder if the conspiracy theorists were ever really wrong. I don't know what the Dogman is. I don't know where it came from. But I know one thing with absolute certainty. It followed us home. The next creature we encounter tonight is known as Antler Man. This is Antler Man, winter backyard terror. People who claim to have seen the Antler Man all describe the same impossible shape. Something tall and bone-thin walking the tree line on the coldest nights of winter, with a rack of antlers rising like dead branches above its skull. They say it moves like it's starving, every step cracking with joints that shouldn't bend, but its eyes burn with a strange, deliberate hunger. Some believe it's just another tale told on long, frozen nights. Others say it's older than any story, a creature born from winter itself. This is my story about the night the Antler Man came to our door, and why I still don't step outside after dark when the temperature drops below freezing. I was 16 the winter it started, the kind of winter where the cold doesn't just settle into the ground. It crawls into the walls and makes every room feel 1 degree too quiet. We lived at the far end of a dead-end road, our backyard pressed against an old stretch of Appalachian forest that locals called the Winter Line. My father said the name came from how the frost always formed there first, spreading across the trees like a sheet of silver long before the rest of the neighborhood saw a single flake. Our house wasn't isolated, but it felt that way when the snow came down heavy and the sky turned the color of lead. Nights were long that year, with the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. It began with the power flickering, not the usual kind of brownouts we got during storms, but random, sharp pulses where the lights dimmed to a soft glow before humming back to full strength. My mother blamed the cold. My father blamed the power company. but neither of them could explain why the woods went silent at the same time, why the owls stopped calling, why the wind held its breath, why even the dog refused to go near the back door when the flickers happened. The first night I saw it, snow had fallen in heavy sheets until the drifts nearly buried the porch steps. I stood at the kitchen sink letting the water run until steam fogged the window, and that's when I saw movement between the trees. Something tall stepped out from the shadow of a pine, too tall to be a deer, too thin to be a person bundled against the cold. The figure paused at the tree line, its silhouette breaking into sharp, unnatural points as the antlers rose above its head. I blinked once, the fog on the glass shifting, and when I looked again, the figure had melted back into the woods, as if it had never stood there at all. I didn't say anything at first. The trick of the snow, I told myself, the cold playing with shapes. But the next morning, when I took the dog outside, I saw tracks, long, narrow impressions far deeper than the weight of a deer, spaced too widely for anything walking on four legs. The shape of them made my stomach tighten. The dog wouldn't go near them. He whined low in his throat and backed toward the porch, tail tucked so tight it nearly brushed his belly. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of something moving along the porch boards. Not heavy footsteps, more like slow, deliberate shifting, as though something was pressing its weight into different angles, testing the structure. I held my breath and listened. The sound drifted toward the front door, then circled back toward the kitchen, every step accompanied by a faint crack, like brittle bones adjusting beneath flesh stretched too thin. The dog growled once from the foot of my bed before crawling beneath it, trembling. When dawn came, there were marks on the porch, long drag lines where something had knelt and crouched and leaned, deep enough to carve through the frost and expose the wood. My father muttered about teenagers playing pranks, but the look he gave the woods told a different story. He pushed the curtains tighter that morning. He salted the porch steps even though no ice had formed. He locked the doors twice. Then the offering appeared. It was a deer, or what was left of one, laid neatly at the bottom of our porch steps early one morning before the sun had fully risen. Its ribs had been opened with surgical precision, the cavity still steaming in the cold air. Snow around it lay untouched, as though the creature that brought it made no tracks at all. My mother screamed when she saw it. My father dragged the carcass away, refusing to let me help, refusing to answer when I asked why he looked so afraid. That night, the flickering lights came again, and with them the sound, long, slow breathing outside my bedroom window, rising and falling in shallow huffs that fogged the glass from the other side. I pushed myself deeper beneath the blankets, every muscle tight, and listened as something scraped against the siding, moving inch by inch toward the back door. The dog whimpered from the hallway, but didn't dare approach. When the porch light flickered on, I saw the shadow. Tall, angular, antlers grazing the lower part of the eaves. It stood just beyond the threshold, its thin silhouette trembling with each breath. Then it leaned forward, not enough to step inside, but enough to make its presence unmistakable. The light blinked off a moment later, and when it came back, the shadow was gone. We didn't sleep that night. My father sat at the table, staring at the back door. My mother kept the lights on in every room. The dog paced until exhaustion took him. The next morning, the snow lay smooth and unbroken, as if the creature had never been there. But something in the house had changed. The air felt heavier, the silence deeper. My father made a single phone call that afternoon, speaking in low, urgent tones I had never heard from him before. He didn't explain who he called or why, only said we needed to stay inside after dark and keep the curtains shut. A few nights later, black SUVs rolled down our dead-end road. Men in heavy coats got out, their boots crunching in the snow. My father stepped outside to meet them. I recognized two of the men from the Forestry Service, a group that managed the protected land behind our house. They spoke in hushed voices near the porch steps. When they finally left, my father came back inside looking pale and worn. We never saw the Antler Man again after that night. But the woods behind our house changed. The winter line shifted deeper into the trees. Birds stopped nesting near the boundary. And sometimes when the wind blows a certain way, you can still hear something moving between the pines, tall, thin, and patient. Years later, when I moved away, I tried to convince myself it was all some strange winter illusion. But every now and then, when a storm rolls in and the power flickers, I remember the steam rising from that deer carcass, the drag marks on the porch, the slow breathing outside my window. And sometimes I still wonder if the Antler Man ever really left the winter line, or if it simply learned to wait somewhere deeper in the trees, hungry, watching for another house that forgets to close its curtains. Our last creature encounter, the crawler, the thing on our roof, comes from northern Pennsylvania, a stretch of old mining towns and forested backroads where the houses sit close to the trees and the mountains press in so tightly that even daylight feels borrowed. People there whisper about something they call the crawler, a pale, human-shaped thing that moves wrong, bends wrong, and watches from rooftops like it's waiting for the moment we forget to close the curtains. Some say it came from the old mines that collapsed decades ago. Others say hunters have seen it crouched in the treetops, listening, its limbs draped like loose rope over the branches. It has no voice, no known tracks, and no consistent pattern, just sightings from families who swear something crawled on their roofs at night long before they ever saw its face. For months, something moved across our roof after midnight, slow, dragging motions like elbows pulling weight across shingles. At first, I blamed raccoons, then branches, then the old house settling in the cold. But none of those things moved with intention. None of them paused directly above my bedroom and stayed there, shifting its weight in careful, deliberate increments. The sound kept returning, always after the rest of the neighborhood had gone quiet, always when the woods behind our yard had fallen into that strange, suffocating silence that makes the air feel heavier than it should. The house was small, a single-story place tucked against the tree line in a quiet neighborhood at the edge of town. We moved to the sleepy little town when my dad got a new job as the site supervisor at a nearby mine. My room faced the woods, and the window sat just a few feet from where the roof overhang ended. The moonlight often spilled across the siding and glinted off the frost that gathered there in winter. I'd lie awake listening to the roof creak beneath something that felt too heavy to be an animal. Sometimes dust drifted from the ceiling, tiny grains shaken loose by the steady, crawling pressure moving above me. Even then, I told myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. Because the alternative was too strange to consider. It was late January when everything changed. I woke to a faint scraping on the exterior wall, a slow drag, like fingertips tracing the siding from the gutter downward. The temperature inside my room dropped sharply, the way it does when someone opens a door on a cold night, except my door was closed. The scraping paused just beyond my window. A shadow shifted in the corner of the glass, and then I saw its hand. Long fingers curled around the frame, each joint bending backward as though it had too many bones, too many angles. The skin was pale and stretched thin, tight enough that I could see the faint blue web of veins beneath it. It pulled itself closer in a slow, gliding movement, the way a spider moves when it knows it's not being watched. When its face appeared in the window, everything inside me locked still. Its eyes were sunken, glossy, too large for the narrow skull. Its mouth hung slightly open, not in a breath or expression, but as if it had forgotten how to close it. The skin looked smooth and waxy, almost artificial, and it reflected the moonlight in a way that made it appear damp, like it had just crawled from something deep underground. its head tilted to one side, then the other, with a series of faint, crackling pops that echoed right through the glass. It didn't blink, didn't breathe. It just watched me. I froze so completely I felt my heartbeat in my teeth. The creature leaned in until its forehead touched the window, the glass foggy from the cold of its skin. It stayed there, absolutely still, as if waiting for something. Waiting for me to move, waiting for me to break the silence. But I didn't. I couldn't. The sky began to lighten just barely at the horizon, the first thin smear of dawn creeping between the trees. As soon as the light touched the edge of the roof line, the creature's expression shifted. Not fear, not pain, just a sudden, sharp awareness. It crept backward, limbs folding in on themselves, gliding up the siding without sound. Its fingers unhooked from the window frames, and within seconds it disappeared over the roof and slipped into the woods behind the house. The branches didn't sway. The snow didn't crunch. It moved like a shadow, abandoning shape. The next morning, my mother blamed ice settling on the shingles. My father told me not to watch scary movies before bed. But I knew what I'd seen. And more importantly, I knew what I'd heard. The dragging footsteps, the slow crawl, the weight that shifted directly above my room night after night. The crawler had been there long before I ever looked out the window. And I have a feeling it's still somewhere out there, moving across rooftops in the dark hours before dawn, waiting for the next house that forgets to close the curtains. Fact or fiction? That is the question every listener must answer in the quiet space after the stories fade. Creatures like the ones you heard tonight don't endure because people forget them. They endure because someone, somewhere, saw something they couldn't explain. Maybe these tales grew from fear around campfires, from old warnings whispered to keep children close, from silhouettes distorted by the dark into shapes no one wanted to name. But maybe they began with real footsteps on a roof, real eyes at a window, real shadows crossing the tree line when no one should have been there at all. We leave it to you to decide whether tonight's encounters were truth or the remnants of dreams carried from sleepless nights. If you enjoy dark folklore, strange encounters, gothic fiction, and scary stories that linger long after the storm quiets, then Whispers After Dark is where you belong. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which creature followed you into the silence once the stories were over. For now, we'll leave you with the sound of the rain to guide you toward rest. And as always, stay curious, stay cautious, and beware of the whispers after dark.